Okay, very much. That was fabulous. I don't recognize that person. So quickly before I start, I wanted to tell you that everybody has a piece of paper on their table that looks like this. Don't pick it up. Don't pick it up. I will tell you when to pick it up. We're going to do a little experiment here today. Okay. So we're going to, under the topic of maximizing your memory potential, we're going to talk about 3 different things. Making a memory. Today's talk, what does it mean? And then memory and aging, what me word, and making memory work, what in the world can I do? These talks are scheduled about a month apart, so there'll be another one in January and another one in February, and we hope that you will join us for all of those. Today is making a memory. What does it mean? And that's who I am, as Stacy already said, Emeritus Professor, Department of Psychology. And I always, on my talks, say what they're for. So this one is searching for identity. But the name is important. And Stacy listed all my credentials. So I'm actually going to go through a quick exercise today to help you put my name into your memory. Okay. My name is Robin. Now, I'm actually lucky as a memory person that my name has meaning, because the way that you remember names most effectively is if you attach meaning to them. And at least half my talk today is going to be about the importance of meaning. So you start with Robin is a bird, okay? And west is a direction. Now, when I put this up for my students, my 18-year-olds, they don't know what it is. It's a weather vane, but many young people don't know what a weather vane is anymore. So now I want you to close your eyes. Imagine my face. Imagine my face on a bird. Okay, now I'm going to show you my face on a bird. Okay. So this is my face on a bird. And now we're going to put this bird on the west end of a weather vane. Okay, so this is a little trick that I often do for my 18-year-old students in my introductory psychology class, because I tell them that this is magic, that they're going to remember my name forever. That's not really true, because then I tell them the next day why that's not true and what the research shows. But I do think that in this room, there might be a lot of people who actually remember me this way after today. And it's a quick little way of showing you that memories can happen quickly if you invest some effort in making them happen. So I invested my effort in making this picture for you. And because we went through it and we spent a little time with it, many of you will remember it. I even have students come up to me years later, Ken can attest to this, in the grocery store, in the mall. I remember you. You told us how to remember your name with that picture on the first day of class. So for some people, it really sticks. I won't guarantee that will happen to you. Okay. So we're going to have 3 topics today. This is your preview. I always tell people what I'm about to say. And we'll talk a little later about why that's really important for helping people to remember things. We're going to talk in general about information processing. That's a fancy word that psychologists use to talk about what happens when we're thinking and remembering. We're going to talk about encoding, another fancy word that psychologists use. And in this case, they're talking about specifically putting something into memory. That's what encoding is. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about meaning and how you can hopefully invest meaning in the things that you want to remember. Okay, so we're going to start with the information processing in general. So this is my little picture of what happens in the real world. So we have things that we taste, we have things that we hear, smell, touch, and see. That's our sensory experience. So right now, if you were to look around this room, you would have a sensory experience of seeing things, hearing things, okay, touching possibly the table or the chair, okay. So that whole world is out there available to you to remember, but you don't remember it. You won't remember it. And some of it gets into what we call sensory memory. Some of it is actually felt, touched, heard enough to hold it in your mind for a little while. Doesn't stay there for very long. Okay. So what happens is if you want it to stay there, you have to do something different with it. You have to pay attention to it. So you're standing next to, I stood next to many people today that were introduced to me. Some of those names just went straight on, right away. Other names I clicked on and remembered. There's no way to predict that for me. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But paying attention is the way that it gets into working memory. So if you have trouble remembering the names of people you meet, chances are that you did not pay close attention to those names. That's the first step. Because if you don't do that, there is no way it's going to get into memory. Now, working memory is kind of what we're thinking about at the time. So right now, my brain is working a lot. It's trying to remember what I wanted to say on each slide, and is looking at the slides. And that working memory is what's in the main part of your brain, what's in the front of your brain that you're thinking about. Now, some of you in here might be thinking about what you're doing later today instead of focusing on me. That's fine. But that is what's in your mind at the time. So that would be in your working memory. And if you're paying attention to me or paying attention to a name that you heard this morning, chances are it's in front of your head. And later, if you're lucky, it's going to get into a more permanent kind of memory that we call long-term memory. That's a relatively permanent, not guaranteed, but a relatively permanent form of memory. Now, this arrow goes straight from attention down to long-term memory. Now, why would that happen? Why would it immediately go into a semi-permanent kind of memory? That's because it's really important. High motivation. Okay, so when you get a letter from IRS, which happened to us about 5 years ago, letter from IRS saying that we didn't pay our taxes on some money we earned, immediately remember that. That is not going to be forgotten. And it turned out that there was another Robin West who made some money from a company, and they had put it with my ID because I had also made some money with them a few years before that. So it happens, right? But that was so important, that was so meaningful that it immediately went into that permanent memory box. Okay, that doesn't always happen, but I bet you, if you're a teenage boy who gets a girl's phone number, you know exactly where you put it. You don't forget where you put it. You may not remember the number, but you know where you have it. And that goes into that permanent memory. So all of these things are part of how our memory works. There's this whole world out there that we get sensory information from. We pay attention to some of it. We pay a lot of attention to those things that are important. And what happens is that eventually there's this interplay between working memory and long-term memory. So you have things that are in your mind now, and there are things that you learned a long time ago. So most of you understand the words I'm saying. The words I'm saying are in your long-term memory. Your understanding, your comprehension of those words is in that long-term memory. But when I say them, you pull those words into your immediate working memory. You put them into the front of your mind, okay? So there's constant interplay between the two of them. If you're reading a book, you're using your long-term memory to know what the words mean, to comprehend the text, but you're also at the same time trying to think about how this part of the story relates to the previous chapter and the previous chapter. So you're connecting what's in your mind that you've saved for a long time and known for a long time to what's happening to you at the moment, what you're reading at the moment. The other reason that I have all these arrows in there going back and forth is because if we're starting to form a memory, we have to do something with it. We have to move it around in order to get it into long-term memory. First, we pay attention, but if we want to hold it in our mind for a long time, if we want it to be semi-permanent in there, we have to think about it in special ways. We have to organize it. We have to tell people about it. We have to write stories about it. We have to think about it. We have to review it. All these things that you do make that into a permanent memory. I often have people say to me, Robin, why is it that there's this terrible thing that happened to me years ago, a car accident or something like that, and I want to forget it? And I said, well, think about how much attention and review you have given to that information. You write a report to it, you tell the police about it in the first place, you write a report, then you review that report, you tell all your friends about this terrible thing that happened to you. You may even include it in letters that you've written to people. By the time you've done that, it's gotten so much brain processing that you cannot forget it. That's usually how that happens. Because if you give all that brain processing to yesterday's breakfast, you'll remember. Okay. Now, I did say that attention is required, and so this is the first of many little mini memory tests you're going to get today. This is questions about a penny. Now, those of you who are younger may not know what a penny is, you may not have used it, but most of us have used pennies for decades, and we probably never paid attention to what the penny looks like. So here's your first little test. Does the Lincoln on the penny face right or left? See, I'm hearing right and left. They can't both be correct. Is anything above his head? What does it say above his head? Don't say it out loud. See if you know the answer. Is anything below his head? Is anything to his left? And is anything to his right of his head? Okay? So think about it. Think if you know that. Now, if you are an amazing person who is very visual and pays attention to everything in your environment, maybe you'll get all 5 answers. Most people only get 2 or 3 right, even though they've been using pennies for their entire lifetime. So here's the answers. He is facing to the right, which is the answer I heard first, but I did hear some people say left. In God we trust, liberty, and the date, and there's nothing on the bottom. Okay. Now, my point in doing this little exercise is to make the strongest point I can make to you that attention is absolutely critical for memory. If you do not pay attention, you cannot remember. It's not going to happen. Okay, so that is why when somebody is introduced to you and you pay attention to their outfit and their hair and their glasses and you don't pay attention to their name, you got no chance. No chance at all. Okay. So another point that I want to make about information processing, which a lot of people do not think about, is that we have this huge external world around us. Just in this room, we have a lot of stuff. You actually drove here, probably most of you, or walked here, and you passed many things on the street. So that external world is filled with information. It's filled with pictures and sights and sounds. Only some of it gets into sensory memory because you actually see it. You actually listen to it if it's a nearby honking horn or something like that. But we drive by a lot of billboards that we don't even look at. So it doesn't get into sensory memory at all. Then only some of that, if you pay attention to it, gets into your working memory. So it's there in the forefront of your mind when you're thinking about it. And then only some of that gets into long-term memory. So when you go from this huge external world to what you can put into a permanent memory box, you've already lost most of it. Okay. Then the last step is to recall it. To recall it from that semi-permanent memory box. And the reason I call it semi-permanent is because we forget things. Okay? That we do. Okay. So from sensory memory, which you actually saw, working memory, you paid attention to it, you're still not going to get it all recalled. So why do I say this? Because my message here is that our memory systems are made for forgetting. They are not, it is not designed for memory. It is designed for forgetting so that you will only remember when you pay attention, when you think about it, when you review it, when you organize it, when you do all that stuff. Okay? Our memory system is not made to aid memory. And one really good reason for this is that you would be overwhelmed. If you remembered everything that happened to you, every conversation you ever had, every experience, you'd be overwhelmed. So the system is made to forget and for us to only hold on to what is really special to us, what we spend some time on. And a couple of years ago, 60 Minutes, I believe it was, they had some people on who have amazing memories. And they could say in January 15th, 2010, it was raining and this is what my conversation was, and this is who I talked to. And they reported, those people who have these amazing memories, that it was actually kind of a burden. It was a little bit of a burden to be able to have all this stuff in your memory that really isn't that important to you. So it's made, the system is made for forget. Okay, so psychologists like to use a lot of fancy words. So in our memory system, psychologists study encoding, which is getting things into memory, storage, which is holding it there, and retrieval, which is bringing it back out again. But today we're going to focus only on encoding, which is also called acquisition, which is also called learning. So this is when you're trying to put things into memory, and hopefully some of what I say today will get in there, and will stay in there. But I do a lot of different things to try to help that to happen. Like I say ahead of time, this is what I'm going to talk about. And then when I finish, I say, okay, this is what I've already talked about. And hopefully that will help you. I'm going to do a little bit about the brain, not very much. One thing I want you to notice here is that emotion in the brain is primarily in the amygdala, right there. This is a slice through the middle of the brain. The amygdala is right there, and right next to that emotion center is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the main part of the memory system that helps us to make new memories. So if you have a relative, a friend with dementia, chances are that they have some damage in the hippocampus, which makes it very difficult for them to make new memories. They cannot make new memories because the hippocampus is essential for that. Now, that is not where memories are stored. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But the hippocampus is where we start a new memory. Notice that it's right next to the emotion center. I believe this is the reason why emotions are typically fairly easy to remember. So when you remember something about your family and you're writing the story for searching for identity, the emotions that you felt when your parents first told you that story are probably the reason why you remember it, because it connected to you emotionally. And we do find that emotions are easier to remember than other facts and details frequently in our experience. That's why I wanted to bring this up. Okay, so let's think about where memories are stored. Okay, everybody knows what this is. Anybody not know what this is? Okay, it's a barn. It's a red barn, because I don't know why, someone has decided once upon a time that barns had to be red, I don't know why. There's a silo next to the barn. There are animals in front, okay? And you don't have any trouble understanding what this picture is. You can see what it is, okay? You can recognize those different things. But one thing I want you to know is that every one of those memories that helps you to recognize a pig, a sheep, chickens, hay, loft, silo, every one of those memories is in a different place in your brain. We store memories all over our brain. This is one of the reasons why when someone has a stroke, we can sometimes say, oh, the stroke hit the motor area, which means they can't move a certain hand. But we cannot say or predict where the memories will be lost, because memories are stored everywhere in our brain. Every memory we have is connected to lots of different things. So anything you remember today will be connected to possibly my name, the things I said, the pictures on the screen, what I looked like today, and my blue suit, all of those things are connected, networked and connected in your brain to this one experience. So that's why I use that picture to kind of make that example that we store our memories everywhere, and you didn't have any trouble with that. Okay, quick review. We talked about sensory, working, and long-term memory, that there are 3 stages. We talked about the fact that attention is required for memory. We only recall a very small subset of the world around us. We don't recall all of it, and probably that's mostly good. And memories are saved in connections across the brain, everywhere in the brain. This is one of the basic principles I wanted you to know about here. Okay, so that's my first point. It's kind of in general, how does the system work? Okay, so now we're going to focus only on encoding specifically. How do we get things into memory? Can somebody tell me what time it is? I want to see if I'm on schedule. Okay, we're good. All right. Okay, so encoding attention. We already talked about how important attention is. But let's look at what gets us to pay attention. So we typically pay attention to things that are loud. We pay attention to things that are colorful. We pay attention to things that are important. I already told you that. We pay attention to things that are active, moving, okay, moving around. We pay attention to things that are changing. The slides are changing. Each one makes you look again at the slides. We pay attention to things that are repeated. Okay, this is why advertisers repeat their commercials over and over and over and over again, right? Okay, so if you want to put some new information into your brain, encode it, you need to pay attention, and so you need to do whatever you need to do to make it important to you, to make it powerful or loud in your brain. Think about thinking about it over and over in your brain, repeating it in your brain. Okay, those are the things that make you pay attention. Okay, so that's attention. We talked about that already quite a bit. So let's talk about the next thing, which is review. If you want to remember something, you need to review it. I said, remember, you're working on it for a while, you need to review it. And there's one thing that people call rote rehearsal, which means that you just repeat it over and over again. So I meet Shoshana and I say, Shoshana, 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 inside my head. I don't say it outside, she would think I was crazy. I say it inside my head. And when I teach memory classes, I do that. And I memorize everybody in the class, usually 15, 20 people, no more than that. But I write down little notes when I first meet them, and I go around the room and I meet a lot of them ahead of time. And then I run their names through my head. And I go around the room and I say, oh, that's Marlene, that's Karen, that's, I go around the room. And that's an exact copy of what I heard, an exact repetition of the name. And it's not a highly effective way to remember. It will help you. So right now in this setting, if I have repeated names, I can remember them right now in this setting. And this is what I do in my memory training classes. But when I go home and I go teach some other class and I go talk to other people, those names are lost. I don't remember those people. In that setting, I'm repeating it a lot. I'm getting it into my head. It doesn't stay with me all the time. It really doesn't, because that's not enough. But it is very effective. So if you study and review more, you are likely to be able to get it into long-term memory. And this is what students do when they study for exams. They study and review, they read it, they outline it, they talk about it to their friends, they ask their teachers questions, whatever they need to do, working on it all this time to get it into their memory. And one of the things about study and review is that it doesn't work very well if you do it only once. Even if you do it for 3 hours, like students think if they cram for a test for 3 hours, they're going to be able to remember everything that they crammed into their head. That is not good. It is actually better. Math practice is one long study session. It's actually better if you study half an hour now, half an hour tomorrow, half an hour the next day, and a half an hour the next day. That's what we call distributed practice, mini study sessions, even if the total amount of time is the same. Okay, and this is the data on it. I don't know if any of you like data, but this is what it shows. So let's say you practice for a half an hour, another half an hour, another half an hour, another half an hour. So for this group, they studied 4 hours, 2 hours in a row, 4 study sessions, 2 hours in a row. This group up here studied a half an hour, and then later another half an hour, and later another half an hour, and later another half an hour. Look how much more they remember. Okay, so if you spread it out, your learning, it's much more likely to work, which is why if I'm sitting here saying the names over and over and over again, that's not good unless I can take my little notes home with me that say what a person looks like so that I can remember and practice and review it for another time. Okay, that seems like a lot to do, but it does help. And one of the things that I do as a memory practice, because I'm a memory expert, so people expect me to remember their names. Names are really hard. So one of the things I do is if I'm going to an event at the synagogue, and I know that there will be people there who belong to the synagogue, I pull out my synagogue roster. I pull out my directory. And before I go in the building, I look through the directory and then I try to picture each of those people whose names are in the directory. I don't know everybody, but I know a lot of them. I probably know 100 of those names. And I go through and say, okay, that's what she looks like, that's what she looks like, that's her name, that's his name, okay? So that when I go to the synagogue, I don't look like a fool, and I can talk to people, I can say hello to them by name. Well, interestingly, and so that's my form of distributed practice. So I look at their name again, each time I'm going back to that event, to that building to see those people. But I told people, this is an interesting story. When COVID happened, I realized, and I talked to Ken about it, I said, you know, this is gonna create problems for people remembering names. Because for a year, for 2 years, they're not gonna have social events, they're gonna see some of these people on Zoom, but people don't necessarily look the same on Zoom as they do in person. And especially with this tiny little head instead of this big head where you can see the face. And I said to Ken, I said, you know, after we go back to social events, after COVID, it's gonna be very hard to remember those people. The people that you love and know and see and talk to anyway, you will remember. But the people who are maybe acquaintances that you didn't know quite so well, whose names you used to be able to bring to mind, they're not gonna come back to you. They're gonna be much harder to remember because you're not getting that distributed practice anymore. You're not, in my case, pulling out the directory, but even if you don't pull out the directory, you're not seeing them, you're not having other people call them by name, you're not reminding yourself of their name by seeing them. So it really wrecked our memories, in my opinion. It wrecked lots of things, but it definitely wrecked our memories. Okay, so we talked about attention. We talked about review. And the third thing we're going to talk about under encoding is meaning. Okay, now I like using little keywords like this, arms. You can arm your memory. But even though I've got this little cue up there, it's kind of actually backwards because you should pay attention, invest meaning, and then review all the meaning that you've invested in this information. And it's not really in the right order, but it's a nice word for this. You're going to arm your memory by paying attention, by reviewing, and by using meaning. Okay. So meaning is essential. Now we're going to do a little exercise in here where I hope to prove to you that meaning is essential. And it has to do with those pieces of paper on the table. Don't move them yet. So it is based on some extensive research done on the concept of prior knowledge. And one of the reasons that I tell you what I'm about to say to you when I'm giving a lecture or a speech is because we know that if you have prior knowledge of what you're about to hear, you are more likely to remember. Okay, so we're going to try and demonstrate that here today. So I'm going to give you a paragraph. I'm going to read a paragraph off. And I want you to try to remember that paragraph. And I want you to use your little sticky notes and write down what you remember after I read the paragraph to you. But you cannot cheat. You cannot start writing notes before I finish the paragraph. Okay. You have to wait until I finish the paragraph. Okay. And you do not have to write down every word. It's going to be a long paragraph, but what I really want you to get are the main words, the gist of the story. And so for example, if I said there are cows in the meadow eating weeds, you might write down cows, weeds. That's enough. You don't have to get more than that. Okay. You don't have to remember meadow. You don't have to remember all the words. Cows and weeds is enough. That's the main gist. Okay. And you're going to write your answers on the sticky notes. Okay. Now, the next thing is going to happen before I read the paragraph is that you need prior knowledge. So you're going to pick up the piece of paper that's on your table and you're going to pass it around. And I'll show you what it looks like. You're going to pass it around so that everybody at your table reads it, but nobody should say anything out loud. So pick it off the table, it's taped down, but it's okay, you can lift it. Look at the back of it. On the back of it, it has a little phrase about Sally. Don't say it out loud. Don't say it out loud, because I don't want the other tables to hear what you have at your table, because each table has a different piece of paper. Okay? It's something about Sally. The story's about Sally, and there's a phrase about Sally on the piece of paper. Okay? So what's going to happen next is once everybody at the table has seen the phrase, everybody at the table has seen the phrase about Sally, we're going to read a paragraph to you. Now, there's a lot of young people in here. You have an advantage. You have an advantage. When it comes to recalling new information, young people are usually better at new information. Okay, so you have an advantage. I'm going to count on you. So anyway, I'm going to read this paragraph. And after I read it, you're going to try to write down the main ideas of this paragraph, okay? It's gonna be just, not every word, you're just gonna write down as much as you remember. Ready? Ready, 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 everybody paying attention? Okay, no note taking until I finish, okay. Here we go. Sally first tried setting loose a team of gophers. The plan backfired when a dog chased them away. She then entertained a group of teenagers with motorcycles. Unfortunately, her stereo system was not loud enough. The crabgrass might have worked, but she didn't have a fan that was sufficiently powerful. The obscene phone calls gave her hope until the number was changed. She thought about calling a door-to-door salesman, but hung up a clothesline instead. It was the installation of blinking neon lights across the street that did the trick. She eventually framed the ad from the classified section. Okay, now write down the keywords you remember. And if you only remember 3, that's fine.
Does the word Sally count?
I told you the word Sally ahead of time, that's not fair.
I'll do that one.
Give you another 30 seconds to write the words. Okay, how many people, now I'm going to assume that there are no words that you wrote down that weren't in the story, because that's usually the way it works. People don't make up words in this situation usually. Okay, so how many people remember 4 things, at least 4 things? Okay, how many people remembered 8 things? Look at those, there are young people, 8 things, there's 2 young people over there, not only are they young people, but they got the best cue for the story. Okay, so can one of you read the cue for the story?
Sally did many odd things.
So it did many odd things, okay, that was not the best cue for the story, I'm wrong, so I have to go back. Now I have to ask myself, how many of you got 7 things right? Okay, and we did 8, how many got 9 right? Anybody got 9 right among the young people? Okay, very interesting, okay. So it didn't work. This is my experiment, it didn't work. That's okay. Somebody read the other thing I had passed out. It's on this table, Marlene, you want to read it?
Sally wanted her neighbors to move away.
Sally wanted her neighbors to move away. Okay, so this is obviously an uncontrolled setting, in a research setting. We have found that telling people Sally wants her neighbors to move away actually makes them remember more of the story than just saying Sally did many odd things. Okay, so in a controlled environment, in a controlled setting, that is prior knowledge about the reason how all these weird things fit together, about the gophers and the stereo system and the clothesline.
It did make me pay more attention.
Okay, so Marlene said she thought it made her pay more attention to the different things. Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, so that is prior knowledge, and normally under a controlled situation in a memory laboratory, having that little piece of information really helps people to remember the story. Okay, so we have attention, review, and meaning that we talked about under encoding. So we did information processing in general, then we talked about encoding, and now we're going to talk about focusing on meaning, which is my last topic. What time is it?
11:48.
I'm in good shape. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about in terms of meaning is organization. And organizing information is a way to give it meaning so that you are more likely to remember it. I'm going to give you several examples. One is categories, a second is chunking, and a third is making an outline. So you notice that my talk is all in an outline, okay? And that I use this outline to remind you of what I'm about to say and what I've already said. So it's an organized outline. The categories are also very useful. Huge numbers of research studies have been done with this. So if you give people a list, this is a fairly short list. Psychologists like to give people longer lists than this. This is only 10 items. But you may notice if you read it carefully, that some of those words are animals. Some of those words are vehicles. And some of those words are forms of entertainment. So we have dog, cow, that's cow, animals. We have forms of entertainment, show, film, and movie, and we have vehicles, car, boat, plane. If you notice these categories when I'm giving you a memory test, you are far more likely to remember every word on this list if you say to yourself, animals, vehicles, entertainment. And you may even say to yourself, 4 animals, 3 vehicles, 3 forms of entertainment. And then you will remember the whole list. Because categories are very powerful because they tell you what the words mean. If instead of that, you just go through and say to yourself, dog, show, park, boat, cat, film, movie, mouse, plane, cow, dog, show, park, that is not as good. It is better to make meaning out of it in order to remember it. That's the first example. Why do categories work? They work because our brains connect information in networks. I mentioned this earlier, now I'm going to illustrate it for you. Bird is connected to nest, wings, and feathers in your brain. How do we know that? If I give you the word bird before I give you the word nest and I ask you a question about it, you respond faster to nest when I give you bird first than you do if I say something else like garbage or truck. Okay, you respond faster to the word nest when you just heard the word bird, because our brains are organized that way. Our brains are networked, things are connected in our brains. That's what I was trying to tell you about memory, that things are all connected, memories all over the brain, but they are kind of organized thematically or meaningfully. Okay, so we also have up here, we have directions. And if you live in Florida, in the South, you think of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, perhaps, as key parts of the South where you live. Those all are connected. And you might know that birds fly south. So maybe there's a connection to birds flying south in the winter, although in Florida, we don't notice it so much because they tend to stay. But now, there's another way to think about organizing, and that is chunking. This is 14 individual letters. If you don't do anything with it, to think about what it means. Does anybody see something in here?
PhD.
PhD, CBS, NBC, okay? If you notice those meaningful pieces of information, it's no longer 14 different letters. It's only 4 sequences of 3 with X's on each end. You can remember that, okay? And it's even easier because you can even say to yourself, well, NBC and CBS are TV stations, and PhD and SAT are related colleges, so I can remember that. And now it's not 14 individual pieces of information, it's grouped into sets. And when you group information into sets or chunks, it's easier to remember, mainly because it's less memory load. Research has shown that people can remember 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. If you group it in some way meaningfully to you that makes it fewer pieces of information, you are more likely to remember it. Okay, that's why you have to find meaning and connect things that are meaningful later. A third thing I already mentioned is outlines. That's a very good way to organize. So we started our talk with information processing in general. Then we talked about encoding. Under that, we did attention, review, and meaning. And now we're going to do, we just did organization. Now we're going to do 2 more ways to make meaning out of the memory. But outlines are very helpful. Okay, so we talked about organization. We talked about using categories, using chunking, grouping things into sets, and using outlines. These are ways to organize information in your brain to make it more meaningful to you. And if you take the time to do that, it actually aids your memory. Okay, connecting cues is another thing we can do to make things more meaningful to us. So these cues can be external or internal. So when I gave you the word ARM to remember attention, review, and meaning, it was external to you initially. It was my cue that I gave to you, but maybe you've now internalized it. Maybe you think about it inside your own head now, so that it's internal. It's not an external cue anymore. An internal cue that a lot of people use is this little rhyme that we use to remember the days in the month. 30 days in September, April, June, and November, blah, blah, blah. Most of us remember that little ditty to help connect us to how many days there are in each month. We don't have to remember each month individually. We have this little rhyme that helps us connect it all together. And a lot of people use rhymes to help children learn things when they're coming up in school. Okay, there's arm. Hopefully now it's in your head and not outside your head. Okay, is this internal now? Robin is connected to west. Robin is a bird, west is the direction. So hopefully that's now internal, even though it started as something outside of your head. Okay, so a second characteristic of cues that are useful for memory is that they can use all of the senses. So you might have somebody walk by you with a particular scent on, and you say, oh, that's the perfume my mother used to wear. And you just immediately go there. You immediately think of your mother. It's a very powerful cue. Foods can be very powerful cues. You can have a particular food and you say, oh, this potato salad is just the way my mother made it. Those are powerful cues. And even the atmosphere can be a cue. So Ken and I lived in Glasgow once for most of the year. And in the city of Glasgow, Scotland, not Glasgow anywhere in the US, and in that city, the air was kind of misty wet most of the time. It didn't really rain a lot, it was just kind of mist in the air. And if you went to the city center in Glasgow, which we frequently did because most of the buses went through there, there would be this very strong smell of diesel because the trucks would backfire in the city center. So I discovered since then that anytime I was in a city where there was this misty kind of air and I smelled diesel, I was like transported immediately back to Glasgow, Scotland. And that's a very strong memory cue. That cues can help you to remember things because they are powerful. They can be planned or unplanned. Okay, I didn't plan the Glasgow one, but I can tell you about another one that is important that was unplanned. And that is that in 7th grade, I lived in California. My parents were getting a house ready for us. We had just moved there. And so we stayed in an apartment for like 6 months, 5 months. I don't remember how long it was. It was long. It felt like a long time to me. I was only in 7th grade. And in that very small apartment, 5 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and me having to sleep on a cot in the middle of the living room. Terrible situation. But at the time, my parents played the radio all the time. The radio was always on. It was just fun to have the radio on. And there was a song that was very popular at that time that was played on the radio, of course, over and over. It was in the top 5 songs, right? And it's that song called Deep Purple. The deep purple falls over sleepy garden walls, right? Every time I hear that song, I'm back in that apartment. Okay? So you don't have to plan a cue in order for it to work for you. But if you plan it, that's even better. Because if you plan it and you know how to plan it, then it will be useful to you. Okay? So let's see how we do with this. This is a very standard memory test. It has 6 words on the left, and there are going to be 6 words on the right that match it. It's called a paired associate memory test. It's used a lot in research. This is very flexible. You can do a lot of different things with it. So I'm going to give you a word that matches each of those. And you're going to try and remember the word that matches with help, the word that matches with in, the word that matches with on, etc. Okay? So here are the matches. Health with happiness, in with out, on with smoke, white with black, truth with sky, cold with brr. Okay? You know that's not how we spell for anymore. Okay. What's with health? What's with in? What's with on? That one's harder, right? That one's harder. What was with white? Black. What was with truth? Only had a couple people who remember that. What was with cold? Okay, and I added a little trick to that. That's definitely okay. So there are connections here. Some were familiar and some were unfamiliar. So the familiar connections you all got. The unfamiliar ones only worked if you thought about it. So how did you get that? On smoke, Margie.
I think because I couldn't really connect it and it made me remember that it wasn't connected.
Okay, so she remembered that it wasn't connected, that one was not connected, so she probably paid more attention to it, right? Okay, did anybody get truth in sky? How did you remember?
Well, sky blue is clear and so is true.
Exactly, true blue sky, yes, true blue sky, that's the one I had, Stacy, go Stacy. Okay, so my point here is that cues can be new or they can be familiar. Familiar cues work for everybody. But you have to make new cues, new connections, new associations if you want to remember something that doesn't have a familiar link to it. Okay, you have to invest meaning in it. Okay, how are we doing on time? I have one more thing. Okay, I'm good. I'm gonna do one more thing. And this is to talk about memory imaging. Now, if any of you have picked up a memory book years ago, it used to be in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. Virtually every memory book out there talks about imagery, and some of them don't talk about anything else. They don't talk about how you use meaning, they don't talk about organization, they don't talk about chunking, they just talk about imagery. And the reason is because mental pictures is a very powerful way to remember things. It's very powerful. If it comes easy to you, it's very powerful. If you're one of those people who can look at that health, happiness in and out and just close your eyes and read it off the screen, not everybody can do that, but if you could do that, it's very powerful. Okay, and a lot of the books on memory focus on imagery because names are really hard. People want techniques to help them remember names, and imagery turns out to be the best thing for names also. So imagery is very powerful by itself, and imagery is very powerful for names. And so a lot of memory books out there just talk about imagery. They talk about using mental pictures to remember. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick introduction into what kind of mental pictures you want to use if you're going to be successful with using them. And I should tell you that I'm not very good at mental pictures. It's not my thing. I do lots of other things to remember. And occasionally, if I'm having really a hard time remembering a specific person, I will develop a mental image that will help me to remember them. But it's not my thing. I'm not good at it. But I do get faster at it because I practiced it over the years as a memory person who talks about it. I practiced it, and so it's better than it used to be. Okay, so what do you want to do with your images? You want your images to be interactive. You want them to be connecting information, okay? Like Robin and West. Robin is a bird, the bird's on the weather vane. I've connected both of those things and I've connected it to my picture. So it's interactive, that's good. A second characteristic of good images is that they are distinctive. They stand out. And I'll give you one example from my own personal experience about how powerful distinctiveness is. When the kids were young, and I don't remember how old they are, Ken might remember, but we were at the beach and there were jellyfish all over the beach. And we had to leave the beach. But this is my most powerful memory of the beach. We didn't even go to the beach. We didn't go in the water. We didn't go to the sandcastle, but I remember the beach being covered in jellyfish. That's why distinctiveness is powerful for your memory. If you can make something distinctive stand out in your mind, you're more likely to remember it if you do nothing else, because it's very powerful and research has been done. So a third thing that you want to do if you're going to make an image is, if you can, you want to make it active. You want to make it working. Now, if I had more technical expertise, I would have taken that bird on that weather vane and I would have had it fly west. Right? I don't have the technical experience and technical expertise to make that on the slide, but I could have done that, and that would have made that an active video, which would have made it even more memorable. Right? The fourth characteristic of good images is that they involve multiple senses. They involve sounds, they involve touch, they involve smells. If you can build that into your image, it makes it very powerful. So I'm going to show you an example. I've used the word powerful a lot today, that's interesting. Okay, so this is another paired associate task. I'm not gonna have you do this one. This is locomotive, carpet, oyster, alligator, jacket. They're each associated with another word, and this one's a lot harder because these are much more complex words. And there are no familiar associations for these. So locomotive goes with dish towel, carpet with rainbow, oyster with telephone, alligator with thermometer, and jacket with asparagus. Very complicated, right? Okay, so if you're fast at imagery, you can make an image that will help you remember these words. So the alligator goes with the thermometer. And we have an ice pack here to help you remember that he needs an ice pack because he's sick, he's got a thermometer, okay? So this is just a simple image, it's got the alligator, it's got the thermometer in it, and really, the ice pack is there to kind of help you realize that this is a thermometer, because otherwise it just looks like a weird stick, right? So it's an image that connects alligator to thermometer, but it's not a very good image, it's a weak image, okay? So this is what we would call an interactive image. Now you see that the gator has the thermometer in his mouth and he has the ice pack in his head. So these things are working together now in your picture. You have one picture, the picture is united and interactive. But if you want to make it even better, you want to make it more distinctive, right? So this is your alligator. This is now distinctive. If you live in the state of Florida, you know exactly what this is. This is Albert. Albert is feeling sick, he's got a whole stadium of people behind him, he's wearing an ice pack, he's charging around, don't feel good. But then in the background, you hear the roar of the crowd, because the Gators just got a touchdown, right? So this is a distinctive image. And again, if I had the technical expertise, I would have him walking around. But the point is that you want to invest your images with as much as you can. It takes time to do that, so you practice. You practice making images when you don't need them, so that when you need them, you have the ability to do it. The same thing with chunking, the same thing with categorizing, the same thing with connecting cues. You practice using them when you don't need them to keep your memory sharp, to keep your memory ready for whatever comes at you next that you want to remember. Okay. So you could also create more images for this. You could imagine a locomotive train going down the tracks with dish towels hanging out the window in the wind. You could make sure that they look like dish towels, so you know they're towels and not just flat. You could do whatever you wanted to do to connect these, but it only works if you can do it fairly quickly, which means you have to practice it. Okay, so imagery is better if it's interactive, if it's distinctive, if you use active videos, and if you use multiple senses, hearing the crowd, smelling the popcorn at the stadium. I don't know what you usually have, smelling the beer. Okay, so those multiple senses help the image be more powerful and work better. Okay, so in terms of meaning, we talked about how to use organization, how to use connecting cues, and how to use imagery. These are all very effective ways of adding meaning into something that you have to remember so that you can hold on to it in that semi-permanent long-term memory thing that I talked about earlier. Okay, so we've had 3 elements to this talk. We talked about information processing in general, how things work for memory. We talked about getting the information into memory. Remember, you're going to arm your memory system with attention, review, and meaning. And then we talked about 3 aspects of meaning. So this is my final slide. I will tell you that I will be back in January and February. And if you want to support Searching for Identity, which I hope you do, you will all tell your friends to sign up so that they can come to the next one and the next one. Okay. The next one is on aging. And it will have interesting information about what you should expect from your memory as you get older and what you can do about those things that you should expect. And also how regular normal aging is a little different from dementia in terms of what we observe. And my third talk will have even more memory strategies in it. It will be focused on a lot of different tips and tricks and things you can do to help your memory. I already did some of that today by focusing on meaning, but I really wanted to get that information in first because meaning is really critical to memory. So does anybody have a question? Yes.
Can you comment on why flashcards are so effective?
Flashcards are part of the review process. So flashcards is a review process. If you use them correctly, they will work for you. The correct way to use them is to put everything you get right in one pile and everything you get wrong in another pile and reread and restudy the ones that you missed. Then put them all together, test yourself again, Same thing, ones you know, ones you don't know, study again, the ones you don't know. This is a mistake, frankly, that a lot of piano students make. They play a piece, da 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 da, they play the first couple of lines, blah, 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 and then they get stuck. They don't know how to do the next one, and instead of working on that one for a few minutes, they go back to the beginning and they start over. So what they do is they give all this extra time in review to the part they already knew. And they don't give extra time in review to the part they were having trouble with. So it's a form of review, but you really have to do it right or it doesn't work.
Why is it so short term?
It's not short term because all that, you wrote those cards yourself, right? You wrote all those cards yourself, you went through the process of reviewing it and getting it into your memory, and you wrote the cards to begin with. So it's not just a short term thing. Yeah.
Okay, so when you take all these wonderful, suggestions that you have done for decades of research, and you're engaged in a conversation either with your spouse or a friend, so this is application today. And you're taking one's memory against your memory, and it becomes combative. Well, or somebody else, so we're getting the recall, okay, of a memory.
Right.
So it's not just exercise class, it's actual application. How can we prevent the anger, the frustration, because you have two competing memories in a conversation?
Okay, who knows the answer to this one? Okay, so Janine just said, how do you deal with the fact that two people remember an event differently? And they might start arguing about the fact that they remember different things. Stacey already gave a hint to that. Yeah, Stacey already gave a hint to that, and Ken knows the answer. Because Ken, my wonderful husband, has a fabulous sense of humor. And when he tells a story, he embellishes it for his audience, right? He's shaking his head, no, we know, he embellishes it. This is what Stacey was talking about. Every time he tells that story, he adds something to it to make it more funny. And then by the time he's told it 5 times, it looks nothing like my memory for that event. But the important thing is don't get angry about it, because the way you focus your attention on that is to see it from your own perspective. And this person who's with you saw it from a different perspective. They may remember different aspects of it, and they may have told this story to several other people when you weren't there. So their retelling of that story did not become part of your memory, it's only part of their memory. So the important thing is just to let go of the anger. It's real, it happens, just let go of the anger. Yes.
What I read about that, it kind of ties into your distinctive part, is that we embellish most of our memories. However, what I read was something that is distinctive, like a PTSD, like a heart. That is remembered pretty much the way it happened.
Distinctiveness does affect memory, and distinctive events are more likely to be remembered. But especially if they get reviewed a lot later. If they don't get reviewed a lot later, they may not stand out quite as much, but they're still gonna stand out. Yeah, Bruce.
So I'd like to ask a question of the Sparrow. Is there a course embedded in the law course at all?
In the law courses, I've never seen that. Nobody's ever told me that they've embedded my memory into law courses, my memory tricks. Some professors might.
Yeah.
Because and Ken does a lot of talks, and he also is very good at saying what he's gonna say, then saying it, and then reviewing what he said. So that, and that's a memory thing, prior knowledge, then you give the information and then you review it. That helps memory. So there may be many professors who use that in their classes, like I do, yes.
How does this relate to remembering names?
How does this relate to remembering names? I've used an example with my name. Right.
Linda's.
I gave.
Linda is not like Robin.
Linda is not like Robin, and there are names that are taught, but there's a guy named Jerry Lucas who for decades went on television shows and remembered everybody's name, and he used imagery. He had a system where, Bird was always a particular picture in his mind, and John was always a particular picture in his mind, and Linda was always a particular picture in his mind, and he would remember the entire audience using connecting images. So it can be done. Yeah,
I hope there's a video to review this.
they have a video.
I have a question. This really bothers me as I age, when people say to me, but I told you so, I told you already, what's a good comeback?
Well, first of all, I think that's not a very nice person. So I told you so, I mean, I rarely do that with my husband, I do occasionally say that to him, I did tell you that. But I try not to do that because everybody's memory system is different. And if it's important to her to tell you that, it may not be important to you. It may not have had this immediate push into long-term memory. So one thing you can say is, look, I'm sorry, I had other things on my mind. You know, forgive me if that's necessary, forgive me. But another thing to say is that if you want me to remember something, you need to tell me more than once. So if I have something really important that I want him to know, I will mention it several times, not 3 times in a row, because remember, it has to be over spaced, over distributed over time. I will tell him 2 or 3 times over the next couple of days. And sometimes I'll put a little reminder note on the counter where he usually keeps his own reminder notes that he uses. So I would say, first of all, just, forgive me is a good thing to say. And another thing to say is that if it's really important to you, would you please tell me more times the next time? You know,
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
So I just wanna let you know, when you said your name Robin, I remember, I thought you were gonna lost trees with an I versus a Y.
Mhm.
Oh, that's never forget that.
Okay, good. I versus what? Yeah, yeah.
Is that weird?
Yeah, well, it connected in your head to something meaningful to you, that's what matters. One more question? Yes.
I never heard the term chunking before.
Mhm.
Is that similar to the old days when I was in school studying? And it's called mnemonics, where you use the initials to memorize something? Is that kind of the same?
No, the mnemonics are what I call acronyms.
Yeah.
So, the acronym like HOMES, HOMES, stands for the 5 Great Lakes. Huron, Ontario, etc. And there are lots of acronyms that work that help people to remember. It's a form of cueing. It's a cue, it's not a chunking thing, it's really a cueing thing. Because ARM reminds you of attention, review, and meaning,
Right,
right? And that's really an acronym,
okay.
yeah. And I use acronyms a lot myself. I used to take my daughter, one more story, I used to take my daughter out for breakfast on the day that she had exams. She wanted to study with mom. And she knew mom knew a lot of things about memory, so that helped. And she used acronyms tons of times in her study. She would come in and she would, I would ask her a question about this history thing, and she said, oh yeah, my acronym for that is GARD, and she would say Jesus and Jesus and R that. She used them a lot to study because for her, that cueing of an acronym was very powerful for her to remember. And I use them quite a bit myself. I use them more than I use imagery, frankly, because it works for me. So, all right, thank you all for your attention.